Men take 11 years on average to go get mental health support. The suicide rate is 4 times that of women. Maybe it's time for you to actually reach out and get some support instead of, kicking the can down the road yet again for another year. And so we look at it on a spectrum. It's like nobody is perfect, but which direction do you want to move? Do you want to keep getting worse, or do you want to get better? And if the answer is better, reach out to friends, get the support you need, or come in for counseling and let us help you move in that direction. So we were worried from an optics perspective that we might be crucified for creating a men's clinic, and the opposite happened.
Hello and welcome to the Perspectives on Men podcast. My name is Warren Sinkowski, and today I'm speaking with Cameron Gibson. Cameron is a registered clinical counselor and program director at Manifest Counselling for Men in Vancouver, British Columbia. Cameron holds a master's degree in counseling from City University of Seattle and a BA in psychology from Carleton University. Cameron had the privilege of varied training in contrasting areas like mindfulness and PTSD treatments, allowing him to develop an effective and open-minded approach to mental health treatment. His work with Manifest has included developing the clinical framework and assessment process, and hiring and training the clinical team. Although creative in his counseling work with men, Cameron comes from a structured, goal-oriented, and evidence-based approach. Cameron, it's a pleasure to have you on here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to meet you in person, almost.
Almost person. Yes, virtual, the best that we can do right now.
Yeah.
So I want to start off maybe by asking you about your personal history and your professional experience. Can you maybe tell me how you came to be interested in men's issues and specifically counseling for men?
Yeah, for sure. So I had an unusual entrance into the world of mental health. So I took a job at a community center teaching at-risk and developmentally disabled youth how to skateboard. And the majority of those youth were obviously male, being at a skate park. And I actually loved the job, and probably to this day, it's amongst one of the best jobs I've ever had. And through that, I was forced to think creatively, because teaching skateboarding in itself is challenging, but teaching it to at-risk youth, most of which who had ADHD or different developmental disabilities, required creativity. And I was fascinated with the speed at which they would pick things like skateboarding up versus how poorly they did in school. So it developed an interest in maybe the way we work with males, or the way we treat them, or how they appear in the school system or in society could have be handled differently, or could be, talked about or approached more creatively. And that's how everything kind of kicked off for me.
Okay. I'm curious about when you were saying the way that the school system and perhaps other social services handle boys and men. What have you seen in the past? What's the typical approach? Is it gender neutral, or do they have specific approaches that are taken when dealing with male patients?
So I think the approach to working with mental health is gender neutral. I feel like there's evidence-based approaches that work well. And when working with males, what we found in our clinic is that they're less likely to come. Men don't utilize services. So we've taken a bit of that creativity in our approach. And although it's stereotypical to say, men think very much along the lines of, this wrench fixes that thing on my car. And they kind of approach mental health in that same framework. So what we developed was a structured, goal-oriented, very practical, usable way of approaching therapy, in which the people that come into the clinic go home with tools, they go home with resources, they can try out different communication approaches with their partners, they can use different breathing techniques. There's very practical and tangible things they go home with that help them improve their mental health. And it seems to work well with the demographic that we work with.
In that demographic, do you typically work with adolescent boys or young men or older men or everything?
So at the moment, we're only taking clients 18 and older. And I'd say our average age group is mid 30s, maybe late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because the utilization of mental health services in men is changing through the generations. So we're getting a lot of early 20s, mid 20s coming in now because they're more likely to go to counseling. And we don't get a lot of men from the generations of, say, over the age of 40 who are less likely to come in the first place.
I see. I want to go back to a point that you said about men being less likely to seek help or to seek treatment when they have problems. I agree with you. I think that we've all probably had experience in our lives of men and women going through difficult situations, and women are more likely to talk about it, and men are more likely to try and solve it on their own first, and sometimes only on their own, and they won't talk about it. But is that purely out of pride or stoicism, or um, I'm curious what your view is on that, because guys that have a problem with their car, if you've got a part that's broken, they don't hesitate to go to the mechanic and get it fixed. But when it's your mind or your behaviors that are broken, they do. So do you have any insight as to why that is?
So the number one thing that I've noticed is that, very much generally speaking, men don't leave space in conversations where you can open up about concerns that you have. So if men spend time together, it's on a golf course or watching a sport or doing something active. There's even studies that show that men are more likely to sit facing forward than they are facing each other. So we're even at the point where they don't make as much eye contact or their body language doesn't even face each other. That's how far back they are in terms of communicating needs, communicating emotions, or even reaching out for help in the first place. So we've noticed that immensely in that not only is there limited community supports, not only do they not reach out for help when they're in need, the interactions are developed around things like sports or around things like an event or a specific task that needs to be done. So the opportunity to even reach out for help or the space at which they can do so is so limited.
I see. And I've wondered if the traditional therapeutic approach, which is usually two people, patient and therapist, sitting across from each other in a couch or a chair, having a one-on-one conversation, is that maybe something that could be slowing the progress? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
wonder, why do therapists not go for a walk in the park or do something more active with their bodies to stimulate the conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's the obvious liability issues and confidentiality issues that come with an environment that's outdoor, but we are pushing in that direction and we're trying to overcome those barriers to be more creative. Like we want to develop a men's running group or like a walkie-talkie therapy, anything to break down the barriers and convince people to actually come. Because I think it's unrealistic to take a male who doesn't communicate with his friends, doesn't open up to people, sit him down for 50 minutes in front of a stranger and have him open up about things he tells no one. The success rate of that's probably going to be quite low, and we need to take more of a creative approach to it. I think you're spot on there.
Okay. That's interesting. So, when men come to your clinic and they are looking for help, what are the most frequent issues or problems that they come with? And then secondly, what would be your typical approach in dealing with those problems?
That's a great question. So over 90% of the clients we see, and we're functioning mostly by video, which has been a great thing because we can reach northern communities, interior BC, and it seems like men are more likely to go if it's a video session than if they have to do it in person. But that being said, 90% of these people that we see struggle with anxiety, depression, anger, addiction, or relationship stress. And then within that, we find that emotional suppression is the most common theme that's turning up. So not only are they slowly falling apart on the inside and struggling with these things, they suppress the emotions associated with it, and they are less likely to open up. They're less likely to show any external emotion. So they're less likely to cry. They're less likely to show anxiety or fear on their face. And so a lot of these people are suffering in silence, and they're actors in their own lives, not displaying the emotions that would typically get them the support they need in the first place. So it's kind of a catch-22 in that to get help, you need to either reach out for help or be able to display that you're in crisis. And men can't do either of those things well.
Okay, and so do you have any particular methods that help to crack open the egg and get those emotions flowing again?
We do, yeah. So um, our marketing and our approach to explaining therapy to men is very usable, and the way we get them into the clinic is very user friendly. So we remove a barrier by looking different. Making promises around things like structure and goal orientation. A lot of the reasons that men don't go to therapy in the first place. And then when they arrive, they see a therapist that has experience working with men on a lot of the issues that they're turning up with. And then creativity and rapport building, I find, is incredibly important. So men have a view of therapy that it's like Goodwill Hunting. They're going to come down to the office. Some older gentleman with elbow pads is going to speak to them about their childhood. And therapy's changed a fair amount over the past 10 or 15 years. And now it's someone who's relatable in terms of age, experience, has a sense of humor, is willing to talk about things more informally to make you feel comfortable. We're not there to analyze you. We're not there to pick you apart. We're genuinely there to help and have an honest conversation about how you can change things going forward.
Well, that sounds like a very good approach, and I'm sure it's effective with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, how would this approach differ from other methods, such as the ones I'm familiar with are cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy? I think those are both quite popular in treatment nowadays. Do you employ any of those techniques, or do you have your own unique approach?
Yeah, so we were probably one of the only clinics that developed their own clinical framework. So we consulted some psychologists in the community. We got a few seasoned counselors to give feedback, and we take feedback from our clinical team as we grow. So we make changes on the fly. So our clinical approach is a living, breathing model that's open to change, especially things that make it more effective with the men that we use it with. And not to give too much away, we've combined areas of CBT, psych education, solution focused therapy, to try and develop an approach that seems to be quite effective with the men that we've used it with. There's a lot of coaching built into it, and it kind of blends coaching and counseling nicely together, I find.
Okay, that's interesting. We've been living in a pandemic for over a year now, and I think your clinic was opened prior to that. So, have you noticed any either a rise in the incidence of mental health problems or a change in the nature of those problems since March of last year?
Yeah, we have, in that men are more likely to go to therapy now that there's a pandemic. So for a lot of these guys, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. So maybe they were drinking and kind of getting along, and now they're disconnected from their network, they're disconnected from their job, they're at home more than they used to be, and suddenly drinking is starting to increase, which we've seen in over 93% of the clients in our clinic. So it sort of, they were limping along, getting by, and the pandemic was the final straw that broke the camel's back and caused them to reach out.
Okay, um, that's interesting. And in my personal experience, and I think maybe some others as well, even prior to the pandemic, just in normal times, men seem to be less socially connected than women. I
Hmm.
think that women, I've often noticed, will get together and just talk about anything without an activity being done. Like, it's not sports, it's not fixing the car, it's not any particular,
Hmm.
outing. It's just getting together to talk and express their emotions. And um, men seem to be a little bit more lonely and disconnected. And with the lockdowns and with the social isolation during this pandemic, I think that's further exacerbated the situation.
Yeah.
Um, so do you think that's pushed some men kind of to the point of saying, hey, I need to really talk to someone now?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I think that's what's been happening, and it's interesting to see because obviously this pandemic's caused a huge amount of stress and chaos, and I mean it's taken lives. But I think it's also reshaped the way we look at mental health and reshape the appreciation that people have for the connections and the friends that they do have in their lives, because obviously hugging other people and meet up with your friends and interacting socially is crucial to human development, and it's so important in maintaining good mental health. So my hope is that we'll come out of the other end of this and there'll be a bit of a destigmatization of mental health, and maybe especially men, maybe a more understanding, more openness, more appreciations for social connection, and more openness to discuss things like I'm not doing okay. Like I wouldn't be surprised if no man has said that listens to this. It's so rare that they would go up to someone and say, "Look, I'm not okay. I need help." We want to encourage those conversations.
Right. Yeah, I think that men are often hesitant to express themselves and especially express their emotions in an unstructured environment. And I think that if more of them did so, it would be good for their own health and make them
Hmm.
feel less alone in the world.
Agreed. Yeah,
Uh,
and it's not a bad thing. Like emotions have an evolutionary underpinning in that they give you feedback and information about the environment that you're in and the context of the situations that you're in. Suppressing your emotions lowers your emotional intelligence and therefore your ability to understand people, have compassion for people, recognize patterns in behavior and situations, and even worse so, gets in the way of you trusting your own instinct and your own emotional feedback for reading those situations in the first place. So there should almost be pride, or there should be at least comfort in understanding, processing, and using emotions in a productive way, because they're incredibly powerful things if you have the confidence to use them effectively.
right. Yeah, it is a source of information that can be quite rich if we know how to tap into it.
Yeah.
Um, you spoke to me earlier about your results tracking focus. I think
Hmm.
the skepticism that some people have towards beginning therapy is that they think it'll just be a waste of time and they won't get anything out of it. And I've noticed in many clinical practices that they don't really put a focus on outcomes and results and progress. It's sort of a open-ended process. So you do take this results focus in your practice. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So the problem that we often find with therapy is that it's unmeasurable. The outcomes are not clearly defined. The goals are not clearly defined. So there's no accountability for when you would or wouldn't have success in therapy. So there's no structure in terms of how the process should go or what it might look like. And so we use the analogy of going to physio. So if you tear your hamstring, you end up in physio, hopefully, unless you put it off for a long time, as men often do. But eventually you end up there. You get a prognosis on the degree of the tear. If it's a 1, 2, or 3 grade strain or tear, then you get an outcome of you should feel better within, say, 2 or 2.5 months. You get homework to do in terms of physio exercises each evening. You have regular checkups with the physiotherapist to test the outcomes, to make tweaks as needed, and then over time, hopefully there's an improvement. And that's how we approach mental health. We hold our counselors accountable. We collect metrics on outcomes in terms of psychometric testing. We track feedback from our clients after the third session for every single client in the clinic, for every single counselor, so that that counselor can improve and learn. And we incorporate that feedback, we incorporate the results to change our clinical model and make sure we're the best at helping clients that we can be.
That sounds like a very good approach. And have you spoken with other practitioners from different clinics, or maybe the public health authorities, the regulatory bodies, or associations in psychology about this kind of tracking that you're doing?
In short, no. I don't. I don't think we've had an opportunity to do so yet. Yeah, I don't. We haven't, in short. But I would love to. I mean, in terms of government grants, in terms of when therapy eventually becomes government subsidized, which I'm surprised it isn't yet, we're going to need to track outcomes. We're going to need to track psychometric results to show which clinics are good at doing what they say they are doing, so that we can continue to provide referrals to those clinics, especially if it's a government subsidized or what have you program. So I see structure and I see outcomes and I see measurable therapeutic results across all clinics to show that their product works. Because the process is incredibly subjective and unmeasurable, and you get to the end of it and you're not sure if you're better or not. That's not great.
Yeah, that's very discouraging if you've put in all this time and effort and you still feel like you haven't resolved your issues.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've one thing I wanted to say is on the payment side of things. Like, I know that money isn't really the focus of therapy, but it's definitely a service that's paid for. In the public service healthcare plan, they will only cover the therapeutic treatment of a employee if the practitioner has a PhD or a PsyD, but they won't take masters or below. So that really reduces the number of people that the employees can go see if they have personal issues for which they're seeking help.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's really an evidence-based approach that the healthcare plan is taking, or if it's just based on some assumption that you need a PhD in order to properly provide mental health. So those are clinical psychologists and they're registered, and coaches and counselors. Basically, you would have to pay out of your own pocket,
Mm-hmm.
which makes people more reluctant to enter therapy.
Yeah, agreed. I'm coming to the disappointing realization that benefits and coverage is actually designed in a way that they hope people don't use it. It's a 3 to 6 month wait list to see a psychologist. No one in crisis is going to go, okay, well, 3 to 6 months from now, that'll work. Get in to see that psychologist, who will probably see you once a month because they have such a big caseload that it's not manageable in the first place. I think it's on money at the end of the day. So if you provide benefits plans to people that don't use them, that's good for business.
Yeah, it perhaps saves money for the system as a whole, but would not be good for the actual people who need the service.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, maybe we need to have a kind of emergency room for mental health the way that we have for physical health. Like, obviously, if someone's truly in crisis, they can go into the ER of a hospital. But
Mm-hmm.
there doesn't seem to be anything like that, like a quick response service that's in the community for people who need it right away. That's not purely focused on mental health.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'd never thought of that concept. But I mean, if you've been in the ER waiting room, it takes hours to get in to see a doctor, let alone see a psychiatrist. And I think even with COVID now, that's been exposed even further, in that the professionals that work in hospitals are so burnt out and they're so worn out that they don't have time to deal with mental health concerns because they have so many people who are physically ill or hurt, or I mean even dying, as we've seen with the COVID cases in the hospitals. Yeah,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you would think they would want to get more people into this system at an earlier stage so that the costs and time that required to address the issues will be shorter or less,
yeah,
rather than waiting until they're completely in crisis and then it's worse, it's more difficult. Like
yeah,
British Columbia in particular, where we live, has a drug addiction problem that's widely known for a long time. I think there's a suicide problem as well. There's a mental health problem, and those are very expensive to treat when they become at an advanced stage.
yeah,
So, touching upon it at an early stage, you would think would be the better way to go.
yeah. Agreed. Yeah, and proactive counseling, proactive mental health supports are the direction to go. We're writing an article at the moment, which will be released soon, about all the benefits of reaching out before you hit your breaking point. Because if you do reach out when you have already hit your breaking point, what you do for the first few weeks or even the first month is crisis intervention. So a human that's literally falling apart and so overwhelmed comes into counseling. You're trying to stabilize that person. There's no progress made in terms of the counseling or improving that person's well-being until they are stabilized. So we always encourage men to come in before everything has fallen apart so you can get a head start on it, and then you can see the benefits and also reduce the severity of the outcomes as well. And just a quick note, with the government, I think, inevitably will include counseling as a free service through maybe MSP or whatever the funding body will be. And if they do that, they will save so much money, and that people will come into counseling earlier because the barriers to get access to it will be reduced, and the outcome will be less crisis, lower suicide rate, less opioid death overdoses, because we're getting ahead of the problem that we all know exists and solving it earlier on, which we really need to do.
Well, I really look forward to seeing that article on proactive counseling. I think I would like to use my network to share it once it's out and spread it
Okay.
widely.
Appreciate that.
Um,
Thank you.
I'm curious in your work, counseling well, therapy and counseling are often thought of as taking a sick person and bringing them back to the baseline, of healthy or functional. But do you also do work on helping men reach their potential, like taking an ordinary guy who's kind of muddling through life, he's struggling, but he's doing okay and he's not in crisis, and really pushing him to improve his habits and his beliefs so that he's thriving instead of merely existing?
We do. Yeah, we do a lot of that work. So if you have access to counseling or you have benefits that does cover an RCC, it's worth doing a tune-up. It's kind of like getting to know yourself better, getting to know your weaknesses, your strengths, where you're held back, what gets in the way of you having success. We can do things like improve performance at work, improve the quality of your relationships, improve emotional intelligence, even improve the happiness or joy you take from potentially mundane tasks in your daily routine. We work with men to change their perception of how they view things in their lives. And at the end of the day, perception is everything. If you can take happiness from small things, you will be infinitely happy. A lot of people don't even take happiness from big things. So it's a perception switch, it's a tune-up, and the men usually benefit from that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that our culture, the way we live now, especially with social media, it's like a consumerist treadmill where you always have to get the bigger and better thing in order to
Mm.
get that dopamine hit. But even when you get there and you reach your goal, there's the next one after that. And it just keeps leveling up, right? People think of it as like a ladder. But if you're not even happy with your current goals and achievements and possessions, then what makes you think that being at point X will make you feel any different?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the big things we talk about is mindfulness, which has got kind of a buzzword around it now. But Mindfulness is crucial in that it grounds you in the present. So men are often worried about things that they can't change in the future, or anxious about things that haven't happened yet in the future, or they spend a lot of time ruminating or thinking about the regrets that they'd had in the past about opportunities missed or things they didn't do. And not a lot of people spend their time in the present. And there's so much power to being in the present. So it's one of the many things that we do cover when people come in for more of like a proactive counseling or coaching approach. And that we can help them be present, be grounded, and take more joy from events that other people don't.
I think that would be a very good way to begin the process.
Mm.
I've tried doing some meditation in my own life, and also mindfulness during the daily activities. You know, when you're washing the dishes or doing some chore, and I find that you do it better. And the challenge, though, is to wrestle your mind away from the past and the future, and keep pulling it back to what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great one. I do mindfulness on the bus. That's where I basically hone the skill. In that, when you're on the bus, you're going to arrive on time. Like, assuming you've left enough time ahead of you, there's no rush. Like, you don't need to will the bus forward. It's going to stop at its stops, and typically it arrives within 5 minutes of the time it's supposed to be there. But so many people sit on the bus and they're on their phone, or they're distracting themselves, or they're trying to almost rush the bus forward. And little pockets like that in life are perfect for mindfulness. Like, why not just be on the bus when you're on it and relax? Like, feel the fresh air come through the window, get a good seat in the back, feel the sun on your face, go over the Granville Street Bridge and appreciate the view. Talk to someone, like, don't be a zombie that doom scrolls and waits for the bus to arrive. There's so many little moments you can take. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
that reminds me of the phrase by Ram Dass, "Be here now,"
Mhm.
and that's from perhaps our parents' generation, but some people will be familiar with it. And it seems like smartphones paired with social media do the exact opposite of that many times, which is they take your attention and they remove it from your present surroundings and they put it on something else, whatever that is. It could be a distant friend. It could be some influencer on Instagram. It could be, a video of somebody talking or doing something funny or unusual, or a news article from halfway around the world, but that's not really where you are and when you are now. And almost all of those things we have no control over, or very little control. And yet that seems to be what's consuming people's attention most of the time nowadays.
Yeah, it's mindless. Being on an iPhone is mindless. You have a constant feed of tiny dopamine hits over and over again that do nothing for the growth, like nothing for neuroplasticity, nothing for your well-being, nothing for the growth of you as a person, nothing for your social skills. It will just suck the energy out of you. And they're incredibly addictive. It's terrifying how addictive cell phones are.
Well, I think they're even designed to be addictive. I believe the big tech companies hire psychologists and behaviorists to make them more attention grabbing, and to have people have more time of eyes on screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of their metric, right?
Yeah,
Because then when you have that, you can sell advertising dollars, and that's their business model. But
exactly.
it's what the phrase is, if you're not paying for it, then you're not the user, you're the product, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. And from an addiction perspective, it's cue, routine, reward. So the cue is the vibration in your pocket, the routine is pulling it out, and the bright light in front of you. The reward is like the blood red notification on the baby blue background that a social psychologist developed to capture as much attention as possible. And then the second part of that reward is the dopamine hit when 7 people like the photo that you posted and it's only been 5 minutes. And then you have more dopamine about the anticipation of how high that number might go over the next 3 or 4 days as more eyes land on it. And you do that 1,000 times a day for a year, you are addicted to a product.
Yes, and then you have to go into therapy to deal with that addiction. Um,
Basically.
I'm curious about when you began your practice and this manifest.me, Manifest Wellness opened. Um, what did people say, or what kind of reactions did you get when you say when you said you're having a clinic specifically for men? I think that there's been a lot of attention on women's issues in the last, well, pretty much my whole life, at least the last 10 or 20 years. And a lot of that is warranted and it's justified and necessary. There hasn't been quite as much gender specific attention on men.
Hmm.
And so what do you think is behind that? And what would be your response to any
For sure.
possible critics who say, men don't need it?
Yeah. So we were worried from an optics perspective that we might be crucified for creating a men's clinic, and the opposite happened. So I consider myself to be a feminist. I have some feminist friends, and so I started circulating some of our social media, circulating the website, and we had incredibly positive reactions. So I feel like there's allies around us in the community that are supportive of men finally getting the mental health support they actually need. Because men are often at the root of a lot of the problems in society. So, abusive relationships, alcoholism, violence to each other or to women, whichever direction it goes. So, if men get support that stops them from developing into people like that, obviously not all men do, we can derail a lot of these issues that are centered around men and make sure that they get the support they need and become the incredible members of society they can.
Well, that's a very optimistic message, and I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that you had a largely positive response.
Yeah, we honestly thought the opposite was going to happen. We were preparing for that, and
Hmm.
it didn't.
So I think it kind of proves that men and women are not enemies. We're really allies,
Hmm.
and doing good things for men does not take anything away from women. It doesn't harm women. In fact, it probably does the opposite, because if we have better men in our community who are more grounded,
Yeah.
more mentally healthy, and have better behaviors, that's going to benefit everybody,
Hmm.
right? Not just the men.
Yeah, exactly. And society has pushed men into an area where they're less comfortable opening up and they're less comfortable showing stereotypically weak type behaviors, and that's probably part of the bigger issue in itself. And so, if all people are supportive of men getting the help they so obviously need to improve their mental health function and then be better members of society, I think it would benefit everyone.
Yes, I agree fully.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can tell me maybe about any books, people, or ideas that have influenced your way of thinking and your practice.
Yeah. So the first big one is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. If you haven't read that book, I would recommend you do so. He paints such an interesting picture of perception. So he is in a concentration camp and he's a psychiatrist and talks about how meaning in life is everything. So if you can find meaning and purpose in the things that you love or the things you enjoy, not only will you live longer and survive more stress, more adversity, but you'll have better mental health and a better quality existence, basically. And that book really moved me because he went through something that no human should ever go through. And his perception of that event, from my understanding, obviously wasn't positive, but it changed him to create a type of therapy that was positive. It's an incredible book. And then, secondly, basically anything written by Ryan Holiday, I think. Like I've read Ego is the Enemy, and I've read what was the other one called? Um,
There's one on stillness.
yeah, or The Daily Stoic is another one that I enjoy, but there's a third book that I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think The Obstacle is the
Obstacle
Way.
is the way. Thank you. Yeah, ego is the
Yeah.
enemy. Obstacle is the way. And I'm a big reader of the Daily Stoic as well. I do enjoy reading those each morning. There's 364 stoicisms you can learn from. And it's a nice routine to start your day with one of those.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Ryan Holiday. I've been following his work for a few years now, and he's kind of a protege of Robert Greene, the great author who I also admire.
Mm.
Um, and there seems to be a Stoicism revival happening, at least online nowadays. It's come back into vogue, at least in certain corners, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think Stoicism is sometimes misunderstood because it gets confused with emotional suppression. And to be stoic, you can still feel emotions. You can still process emotions, but it's the process of doing so in a very methodical, logical, and practical way. Instead of having your emotions overwhelm you, especially strong ones like anger, you can think about how they impact you. You can have the intelligence, I guess, the emotional intelligence to use them as productive tools, or you're in control of them or able to manage them and use them effectively. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I would encourage all of our viewers here on this podcast to go check out Stoicism and Ryan Holiday in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a contemporary. He's approximately your age and my age, give or take a few years, and
Mm-hmm.
so he's still putting out books. And there's others on the topic as well. I've thought of Stoicism sometimes as almost like a Western Buddhism. There's a lot of parallels, right? Which is kind of
Interesting.
focus on what you can control, accept the things you cannot control, and just be centered, be grounded. Focus on virtue. They had
Mm.
a real emphasis on virtue ethics. Just do the best that you can, and you're not responsible for the outcomes because that depends on so many other factors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very positive, life affirming philosophy that is also very realistic. It's not expecting people to be saints or perfect in any way. It's just, improve yourself in little ways each day if you can.
Yeah, which is such a positive process to live by. Like, I look at mental health in a similar way in that it's a spectrum. It's not a binary. No one has perfect mental health. When we give out psychometric tests, 0 on both measures is suspicious. That's worse than, say, a 3 or a 4 on the scoring, because it means that not only do you have a mental health concern, but you're probably hiding it as well. And so we look at it on a spectrum. It's like nobody is perfect, but which direction do you want to move? Do you want to keep getting worse, or do you want to get better? And if the answer is better, reach out to friends, get the support you need, or come in for counseling and let us help you move in that direction.
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to think about it. Um, As I wanted to share with the audience your website so that you can tell them how they can get in touch with your clinic.
Yeah, for sure. I would appreciate that. So
Hmm.
it's manifest.me. Our numbers on the site. There's a lot of things you can learn about mental health. So we break it down by situations or feelings, and we've done a ton of research to find out which of those men are usually afflicted by. There's things from divorce to grief to anxiety, depression, and you can learn a lot through each subsection of the site. And if you've learned enough that you realize what it is you want support with, the number will come up at the bottom, and you can put a submission into us, and we'll give you a call, or you can call us and get the process started.
Excellent. Thank you. Was there any final comments or words that you wanted to leave us with?
I guess the final thing I wanted to say is that the purpose of Manifest was to get men to come in for the support that they need. So if you are someone who needs support, maybe stop waiting, stop putting it off, and finally commit to prioritizing your health. Men take 11 years on average to go get mental health support. The suicide rate is 4 times that of women. Maybe it's time for you to actually reach out and get some support instead of, kicking the can down the road yet again for another year. So I would just encourage men to reach out to someone if they do need support.
Yes, please reach out if you need support because nobody benefits if you suffer in silence.
Hmm.
Now, are you taking patients just in your local community or anywhere across Canada also?
Yeah, we take clients across all of BC, so all the way up to Prince George, the interior, and even northern Vancouver Island. The outpour of clients has been it's been incredible. We get people from all walks of life, all over the province, remote communities to Vancouver to all over. It's been incredible.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you have that reach. So that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope that through this conversation, some more people have learned some things and they will go check out your website, manifest.me. And those books that you mentioned as well, we'll put them in the link in the description of this video.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Cameron. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.